These four dark figures will ride in on dark horses and mark the end of times, casting shadows of fear wherever they roam. Conquest, war, famine, and death. These are the chilling Four Horsemen of the apocalypse, known for their terrifying mission. But who are they really, and what dreadful outcomes do they bring? You'll probably stumble upon them in a couple of key Christian texts. First, you'll find them in Zechariah and Ezekiel in the Old Testament. Then in the New Testament, John of Patmos goes into them in the book of Revelation. So in Revelation chapter 6, God's got this scroll sealed up tight. When Jesus opens the first four seals, out come these four horsemen riding on white, red, black, and pale horses. While only death is mentioned in the Bible, the others are recognized by what they stand for. Now think about it. Since it's Jesus himself opening these seals, it makes you wonder, right? Maybe this whole apocalypse thing is all part of God's grand plan. Perhaps it's something we brought on ourselves, a consequence of our actions, or a peek into the future we've paid for ourselves. But what's up with these seals? Now, for you to understand the horsemen, you need to begin with the word apocalypse. It actually comes from a Greek word, apocalypsis, which means disclosure or revelation. In English, we just say apocalypse. At first, the apocalypse was only mentioned in the Bible in the Revelation, which discusses some really intense things. Now, those horsemen show up in a part of the Bible where 7 seals are opened, kind of like chapters in a book. These seals unveil important events that lead up to a big day called the Day of the Lord, when Jesus comes back. They're just part of the first 6 seals, setting the stage for the big finish. It's all about Jesus giving his followers a heads up about what's coming before he returns to make things right in the world. Among these seals, the first 4 introduce us to the famous Four Horsemen of the apocalypse. These horsemen symbolize ongoing events that have been happening since the prophecy was given. And as we get closer to the end times, these events are expected to ramp up before Jesus Christ makes his grand entrance. First, we have the horseman riding in on a white horse, symbolizing conquest. This one will be all in white, with a crown on his head and a bow in his hand, ready to conquer whatever lies ahead. People have had all sorts of ideas about this horseman over the years. Some saw him as spreading God's word, thinking white symbolizes purity and goodness, like in the Bible. But back in the 1800s, things got a bit weird. Some even suggested he might be a bad guy, maybe even a hint at the Antichrist. Now, who's this rider really? Well, there's a couple of groups who believe it might be Jesus, especially since later in Revelation, Jesus is described riding a white horse. But then again, others argue that this rider could be the Antichrist, someone pretending to be like Jesus, but aiming to rule the world instead. And then there's the bow the white horseman is holding. It's often seen as a symbol of violence. According to some prophecies, after a time of peace, the Antichrist will turn against the saints and start wars, like mentioned in Daniel 9:27. And even though war usually gets tied to the red horseman, some people also link it to the white one. Some even call him Pestilence instead of conquest, linking him to diseases that spread like wildfire. Then there's the one bringing war, fiery red, according to Revelation 6:4. Now, when the second seal is broken, that's when we see the fiery red horse, charging ahead with its rider, swinging a big sword. But here's what's interesting. Both the white and red horsemen are all about war, but they represent different things. The white one hints at taking over with military power, like spreading faith or ideas. But the red horseman? Well, that's trouble. It's about peace going out the window and the people turning against each other, usually leading to civil strife. This horseman represents the absence of peace on earth. With a big sword in hand, It's a clear symbol of war and violence. But hey, it's not just about physical fights. There's a whole spiritual showdown happening too. The Antichrist will be setting up some seriously creepy stuff in the temple, as Daniel's prophecy describes. It's not just about taking lives in a physical sense. It's messing with people's souls too. And sure, history has seen its fair share of brutal wars. But you might want to sit down for this one, because what's coming during the end times, it's like nothing we've ever seen before. We're talking about destruction on a whole new level. And that isn't even all of it. There's another one. The third horseman. The Black Rider represents famine. When the third seal is broken in Revelation, out comes a figure riding a black horse and holding a pair of scales. Now what's cool, maybe a bit scary, is what happens next. The passage talks about how basic stuff like wheat and barley suddenly skyrocket in price, while fancy things like oil and wine stay the same. You might go to the market and find out you need a small fortune just to buy bread ingredients. And some even think this famine could also be linked to the Antichrist. In another part of Revelation, there's this mention of controlling who can buy and sell stuff, which would make shortages even worse. And some people believe that famine was tied to the wars before it. Makes sense, doesn't it? Wars mess up farming when people ditch their fields to go fight. And if you're as terrified of this prospect as we are, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Now, the next thing you know, there's not enough food, and sometimes whole societies go belly up. And finally, we have the fourth horse and its rider, as described in John's vision in Revelation. This one's known as a pale horse. It's like the symbol of death, usually hanging out with famine and war. In Revelation 6:8, it's said to bring all sorts of bad stuff: famine, disease, death by sword, even getting chomped on by wild animals. Now, unlike the other horsemen who have their specific colors, this pale rider is usually described as sickly looking, and since he's the symbol of death, the paleness of it makes sense. So when the Lamb pops open that fourth seal in Revelation, we see a spooky figure riding a pale horse. He's death. Close with Hades and the underworld, this horseman's got power over a good chunk of the earth, bringing death in all sorts of nasty ways: war, hunger, disease, you name it. Plus, death's the only horseman with a name, sometimes known as Thanatos, a Greek god who's all about peaceful death. And when death rolls in, it's like the final nail in the coffin for the Roman Empire. So there you have it. From terribly bloody wars to famine and death. That was the scary crux of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. But hey, if you're brave enough to handle more horrific premonitions, then you definitely don't want to miss out on our next video.